Welcome to episode 9, where we're going to discuss how to work with text in Photoshop, particularly the text that we might encounter or use in editing music. So, a couple of things that we want to get familiar with, first of all, is the idea of character and paragraph windows. As you would recall from the workspace episodes, we can find our windows under the top menu. If we click on window, there is a series of windows there that we can select them from. Paragraph, character are in there. Um, I have them as part of my default workspace, and you can see over to the right, I have them both here along with the history. Now, as I mentioned, my primary work computer, which has two monitors, I actually have the history broken out separate from character and paragraph, so it's not a tab. So I can actually see history, character, layers, and actions. I can see all four of those windows simultaneously at the same time. That's a nice thing about having a little bit more workspace with an additional monitor, or if you're just working with a larger monitor. But for now, on the laptop here, this is the setup I have. And the character is window is where we're going to determine our typeface, our font here. We'll go ahead and select this one for now. And the style of the font, italics, bold, things like that. Different fonts, of course, have different options. Here's the size of the text that we want. And there's a bunch of other features in here that are really great. So how much space we have between individual lines. I don't use that super frequently. And you'll see why momentarily. If you do have a superscript that you're adding, which does happen, sometimes we need to put something in that is higher and smaller, then you can determine exactly how that is here, which is great for trying to match the original. And then down here we have bold, we have italic, all caps, small caps, superscript, subscript. These are quick default settings. Underline and strike through. Also the color of the text, which for me is always black text. I'm always working in black and white, so that's pretty straightforward. Under paragraph, we have our justification. So you can see right now it's center justified. I can change that to left justified. Again, the type of text I'm inputting, not always a huge issue, because I usually adjust it to where I want it to be. But sometimes I do need to change the justification, especially if I have more than one line of text and I'm wanting it to appear on the page a certain way. It's particularly true when if I'm doing an extraction and I'm actually typing in a title, the movement such and such from the larger work, which I might do with a single text box. Then I definitely would want to make sure that's center justification. And I would want to make sure my composer, and if there's an arranger underneath or an orchestrator, that is right justification. So when I have more than one line of text, definitely I'm going to play around in paragraph a little bit. One of the things that you'll notice here, I have a layer, one layer. And typically when I'm working with text, I try to make sure that I do text last. That doesn't always happen, but one of the things I definitely want to make sure I do before there's other ways to get around this, but for me, the simplest way is I do like having a background layer. As we mentioned before, the fewer layers, the smaller the file size. But I do not want to flatten my text layers. I just don't, I feel like I lose too much image quality. So what I'm wanting to do is make sure I have a background before I start inputting text. So in this case, you'll notice I have one layer. Maybe I have 2 or 3 layers. It could be anything like that. And so what I can do is flatten layers, Command Shift L will do that, and our layers are flattened here. And so now what I can do is I can add other layers, cut and paste other things, whatever I need to do. I may have flattened the layer even before I pasted this music onto this page, and then this music may still be a layer, or perhaps I did this by mistake and I still want my music to be a separate layer. So now what I can do is I selected it, layer via cut, and so I have the music is now in its own layer, along with a bunch of white pixels. There are a lot of white pixels in there. It's not just black pixels, and but I can still adjust it or move it how I want. So we'll work with that for now, just for the sake of an example. So one of the big things that we might want to do is put in tempo marking. Now this is completely inaccurate. I just opened a file that I had easily at my disposal. Let's just, for the sake of an example here, say that should be an accelerando here. So I would probably want to select my character style before I did this, but that doesn't always happen. So I just used the T tool. I don't know if you saw me do that there. Let me get out of this. You can see we have a text layer here. I'm going to delete it. So I am going to hit the letter T and use the text tool, single click, and now I can start typing. And we need to get rid of that extra R. There we go. So now my cursor is still in there. If I hit enter, it's going to make a new line that I could keep typing on. I don't want that. So how do I get out of this? Well, there's a couple of ways, but one of the easiest ways, if you're on a laptop, a Mac laptop, then Command Enter, you will exit the text automatically. The other option is if you have, especially on a PC, I know for sure this works, if you have a 10 key, if you use the return key, the enter key that's part of the 10 key, not the return key that's part of the QWERTY keyboard, that will exit it. If you hit the regular enter key on the QWERTY keyboard, that will make a new line. If you hit the enter that's on the 10 key, that will actually exit you from the text, something like this. Command enter is what I just did. And now I can select V for move tool. It's not typing. I'm not typing a V in because I exited the text tool, and I can nudge it where I want it. Let's say I don't like that look though, or that's not exactly the right thing for this. Well, then I can go to my list of fonts here. I could choose something that maybe I feel is a little more true, and you can see that I have a 0 in there by mistake, but that kind of makes it fun. So there we go, and I could try that. Not a big fan of the way that looks, but you get the idea. Again, Command Enter, I'm out of there. And the reason it's changing the entire font is because if we look over here on my layers, I have this text layer. So if you have multiple text layers, you need to make sure you have the right text layer selected when you're making changes to the character. Otherwise, it won't make the change to the right layer. You'll be kind of frustrated. You might find that you've actually been making changes to another layer that you didn't want to do, and that can be a little frustrating. So we could actually do a bold italic. And, oh, that's kind of nice. Maybe I feel like it's just spread a little too wide for this engraving. So now I can go over here on my character and I can choose some different kerning. I think that's the right word, and make that look the way I want it to look. So that's one way we can handle doing tempo and text. Text for tempo markings or alterations or crescendo or diminuendo or anything like that. One of the things that is cumbersome, of course, is the fact that changing a font is a little bit of an ordeal through this character window. So whenever we're embarking on a large project in the Sarasota Orchestra Library, one of the things we do is somebody will map out what the fonts are going to be. So if we're doing errata and we're adding a bar count and things like that, then somebody will say, okay, tempo markings are this font at this size with this kerning, et cetera, et cetera. And then tempo alterations, like an accelerando or ritardando, are going to be at this font, at this size, with this kerning. And maybe it's italic or something like that. Dynamics, we might have a specific of what those are. And then measure numbers will be their own thing as well. So switching back and forth between all that on a single page of music can be a lot of work. That's where it actually, Photoshop is not the most time consuming, because I could actually handwrite a lot of this way faster than I probably could be monkeying around with switching the text. However, there is a cool little trick that I recommend you explore called character styles, and we'll come back to that in just a minute. Julieannes, who's a blogger for the Adobe blog, has a really great video. Check out her blog, Julieannes' Favorite Type Shortcuts in Photoshop, CC 2014. It might seem a little outdated, but actually super relevant still, and gives you a really good idea how those character short styles and paragraph styles work. And she can cover that way better than I can. So I encourage you to go check out that blog, and there's videos in that blog that are really helpful. Let's talk a little bit about bar count real quick. So I'm going to grab a guide from the left-hand column. You don't have to do this, and I don't always do this, but it is an easy way. You can see my page isn't super straight, so my clefs aren't exactly all lining up there. But I'm not going to worry about rotating right now for the sake of this video. So what I can do now is I can select T for text, and if I had changed the character before I got this cursor, it would automatically change accelerandos, and we don't want to do that. But because I have, and see, it still is doing it. So what I want to make sure I do is I actually click on the canvas so that I have a new layer. Now when I make a change to the font, it's only going to affect that layer. And so, sure, we can use it. Actually, this is a nice one. So I don't have the numbers in front of me, so we're just going to make up that this might be bar 26, and the first bar of the first part might be when I'm figuring out which font I'm going to be using. So Command Enter gets me out of that. I will then change this to 14 for size, and actually let's go a little bit bigger. Oops, not smaller. Go to 16. You notice how that 6 and that 2 are kind of on top of each other? That's because it still has the kerning from my accelerando. So I want to make sure I get rid of that. There we go. And in some cases, you may even want it wider than that, and you could change that. So now I hit V for my move tool, and I nudge it into place. And I may use the guide. If I'm going to have the guides, then what I might do is the first character touching the guide. And that's kind of how I'm able to line up the bar counts so they look fine. And then I would hit the text tool, select again. Notice on the right that now there's a third layer of text. It's saying layer 2. And so I'm just making up measure numbers here. Please nobody use these measure numbers if you're preparing Death and Transfiguration. And we can just continue doing that. And getting them where they are lined up and we're happy with the way they look. And now we have a printed bar count that is easy to read, looks like it came from the engraver, and is lined up with my guide. That's a very good thing. One of the things that I do try to do, and there's different ways you can do this, is something that's really fun with the layers. I'm going to have to pull this up a little bit because this screen, again, is, let's go ahead and make it a little shorter, just because my screen is shorter. We can actually link these layers together. You can do this with any layer, not just text layers. And something I didn't show you when we were talking about the layers is that you can actually hide a layer. So if we look here right before rehearsal A, the 26 is gone because I just turned off it's hiding it. It's not visible. And now it's showing again the eye. So if you see the little eyeball here, that means that your layer is visible. So if you ever don't want to see the layer, like the accelerando just went away, and now we're back. That's one way to do that. So any layer, you can also link a layer. We would use this little chain link here to link the layers. So what I've just done now, you see how they all have this link. I selected all of them using the Shift key. I selected the first one and the bottom one using the Shift key. And we have the linked layers. We have these layers linked, meaning that if I have any one of those selected and I go to my Move tool, that's the letter V, so notice that my Move tool is selected. They're all moving. Do you see that? Let me use the mouse for a little more dramatic. You can see that now those layers are moving together. Now to edit the text on those layers, you still have to go into each individual layer. The layer is not merged together. It's not one layer. There's still 3 individual layers, but they're linked together. So the reason I do that is because it is not difficult at all to mistakenly select the wrong layer while you're working up close, say like here. And sorry about that. And so let's say, I don't really need to get rid of all this debris, but let's say I am getting rid of this, right? And then let's say I have something here that is in its own layer, maybe this piano. So maybe I have this other layer of a piano that's here, or maybe here. Okay, and I may have accidentally somehow selected this, and then I hit the Move tool, and I'm nudging, and I'm nudging, and I'm not sure why my piano isn't moving. See, it isn't moving. And I might be a little frustrated by that. And then I might not realize why until later, and maybe I'm already back on another layer by the time I realize why. Now when I zoom out, all of a sudden, like I can see that my measure numbers are off. Or in some cases, it's very extreme because you might be using your mouse to drag and frustrated that the wrong thing is dragging. In this case, it's a big object, so it's easy to see. but it's not always that easy to see. And so by linking these layers together, essentially what I'm doing is I'm creating a larger body of text so that if something does get moved, I'm more likely to see it. It's going to be more visible to me that that text got nudged or moved. And that's because I don't flatten the text on the layer. That's one of the downfalls, I guess, of that. But again, I feel that the quality, the printing quality, which is why I use Photoshop, is to create masters that we print from, that the printout quality is much better when the text is not rasterized, when it's individual. So you could even do this with all of your text layers if you want. You could then select these 4 layers, and you could then link all 4 of them. You can unlink them the same way, same method right there like that. We're going to get rid of this piano layer. I've selected layer 2. I'm going to hit delete, and that layer is gone. The character styles that Julieanne talks about on her blog, you will find in a window for characters. Mine is floating right here. You can also, of course, go to Window and then click on Character Styles. And I will not talk about paragraph styles at all, but you could do the same with that. Now, this is where you can start saving time if you have a very large Photoshop project that you have a fair amount of text to do. And you could create a character style. We just click New right here, and that's a new character style. Now I'm going to double click on Character Style 1, and here I can change the name. So I could say Measure Numbers. I could just call it that. I could call it Measure Numbers with a certain piece or something if it's specific to that. And then from there, I can select the, let's go ahead and do this. Let's do this one. We'll make it a little different. And the style, I could say I want it bold, and let's say I want it 12. Kerning I don't need that. I don't need any of this other stuff, so I'm not going to worry about that. I don't need it underlined. If I want faux bold, I can do that here. Color is important, and so we're going to want full black color on that text. And of course, you have some other features here that you can play with in this window. So now I'm going to say OK. And you see now I have a measure number style. Now the next thing I could do is I could do a style for tempo markings. So let's say tempo markings. And let's actually say that this is a very traditional project I'm working on. So I'll just do Times New Roman and probably want 16 or 18 for the tempo. I would have figured that out already. Font style regular. We could make that bold if we wanted. And again, the color, we want to make sure we have the right color. And from there, click OK. So now you now have character styles that if you look to the right here, you can quickly change between. So you no longer have to go and just punch in every specific thing for every character that you're changing. You can use character styles to quickly toggle back and forth between the different styles that you set up for your project. And that's going to be very helpful for large-scale projects. For some of the small things we do, like if we're just making one change on one single page, and it's a very quick thing, especially like rehearsal's about to begin, I'll just do that manually. I'll just go into Photoshop manually. So, I might even just use the default font if it's a very quick situation. Text tool, type it in, and print it out. But when you're doing a full prep from start to finish, character styles can be really helpful in setting up your default settings. And you can actually, and Julieanne talks about this, that you can actually now make those default styles within the software, not just within the files you're working in. So if there's some that you're always using, then you can have them in your character styles, and that will save you a lot of time and problems. So I hope that helps explain a little bit how to work with text and the different layers in Photoshop as text layers. And one thing to not forget is that if you do have your layers in the wrong order, even though it says visible, I can't see it because the white pixels of layer 1 are in front of it. So it's important to make sure your text layers are on top of your image layers, especially if you have white pixels in here that might cover them up. Otherwise, you won't see them. So just check all of that. It's always good to check your work when you print it out. You never know when you were cutting and pasting something and some white pixels covered up a dynamic marking mistakenly or something like that. So just always check your work before you put it on the stand. And we'll see you at the next episode. We're going to talk about rehearsal figures.